Bonjour à...
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let's start this session. My name is Thomas Bakbe from DB Consulting. I'm happy to be with you this morning to talk about the headache of data localization. The GDPR regulation created a clear framework on data protection. This European regulation is no longer in line with current data because, as you know, we need more sovereignty. This is what a lot of European states are saying, because GAFAMs are now taking over data and AI, and on top of that, there's a new government since January 20th, which has made the necessity to defend companies a priority. If no one in this room, I imagine, could have fathomed a few weeks ago that they would have to ask themselves the question of whether having data stored in an American data center would be problematic. Well, now you're probably wondering that. And data management, that we're going to be talking about today, is probably already a nightmare or a headache for you and raises questions. During this session, we'll try to answer two questions: how to reduce the risk of dependency, and second question, how could we think today about data localization? Should we transfer our data towards another platform, less risky platform? We have today Blanche Ballion, lawyer at Stevenson Warwood, Thomas Fillot, Chief Security Officer at Miracle, Olivier Vallée, DocaPost CEO, Sylvain Lefebvre, Head of Sales at ODrive, in charge of Cloud Solutions. And we are also with Massimo Gentile, CTO for the Geneva Airport. Before we dive into the heart of the matter, we're really lucky today, and if you will, we'll make sure to have enough time for the Q&A session. But let's start with Thomas. Who is Miracle? What is Miracle? Miracle, what is Miracle? It's not very well known, but it's the French leader for technological solutions that allow you to create marketplaces. So it's a French company that was created over 10 years ago now, founded in France. Initially, the goal was to use the platform economies in the digital world. If you're not capable of supplying a product to your client right away, you can just get it from Amazon on one click. And this vision has allowed us to equip a lot of e-commerces to create their model with the marketplace. What about ODrive with Sylvain? Hello, everyone. I don't know if, had we done this 2 years ago, we would have had as many people in the room about localization and sensitive data. My name is Sylvain Lefebvre. I've been working at ODrive for 8 years. ODrive was created based on a simple idea, which was to say that we had a certain number of sensitive data. At the time, classification was not as developed as it is, but we had a lot of important and sensitive data. This data had to travel, but it also needed to be secured. And that's what's at stake. ODrive has now put into place since 2019 with second cloud classification. It now allows us to manage sensitive data, and we're capable of managing limited access data, because ANSSI has since then made a memo saying that we could also manage this type of data. ODrive, on top of doing collaboration and sharing, doesn't want to break this trust bubble that we're creating with an ecosystem or a client, especially with digital signing. So that is also included in our platform. In our platforms, rather. This way we have a full circle bubble that ensures trust for the client as well. Olivier, who is DocaPost? DocaPost is a company owned by the La Poste Group. We're a subsidiary owned at 100% by La Poste. We offer B2B or B2C digital solutions, trustworthy and sovereign solutions. This is a real priority related to our shareholding situation with the La Poste Group. Revenue 1 billion euros, specialized on softwares. We offers solutions, identification and digital signing, archiving, you name it. So this is what La Poste is doing, and we've been actively advocating for trust and sovereignty, and we offer alternative solutions to clients that have sensitive data, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later. What about Blanche? What are your clients concerned about when it comes to data? Well, hello everyone. Obviously, this is a very broad topic, and I would like to touch upon some elements, but feel free to ask questions, should you have any. But as a word of introduction, because I'm the only legal expert on this table, localization for legal experts is always interesting, because unlike a material good, where localization is clearly identified, if it's a building, if it's a table, we know where it is, but data, it's slightly more complicated, because by definition, it's intangible good. So to put it simply, we may think about the servers. So where are the servers, the data centers located? But the truth is that it's much more complicated than that, because the mere fact of being able to have access to a data from abroad can make data move jurisdiction. And this is a case that I had recently for one of our clients. And that's exactly what I will talk about later on. But this is one of the difficulties that our clients are confronted with. It's the mapping issue of all of their data within large company groups, with the parent company, the subsidiaries, etc. If there were acquisitions or external growth in other countries as well, you need to be aware and have a 360 vision of not only the data that they're managing, so their level of sensitivity, and etc., as well as the regimes that apply to these data, based on the nature of the data and where they are going. Let me give you an example. I don't know which sector of activity you're working in, but there are sectors such as the military, and double use good is something that can be used for the military purposes, but also civil purposes. And sometimes our clients export double use items without knowing it. Dual use item, rather. And when we talk about exports for dual use items or military items, you need export documents, so we're talking about tangible goods here. But just so you know, for data about these items, the regime is exactly the same. So even having access to this information from abroad constitutes an export. So to go back to your question, one of the issues that we have is this mapping and global mapping that we need. We also have issues of discussions between information system managers that have to manage personal data, but not only, and communication between the different departments, so that the challenges of one department is understood by other departments as well. And this is number one. This is the number one challenge. And of course, when it comes to security, resilience, there are a lot of new regulations that you may have heard of. We'll talk about them if you want, but Oracle for the financial systems, and NIS2, with a new law that aims at transposing the directive that was submitted to Parliament and that is currently being reviewed by the National Assembly. So this is something that is probably going to impact companies and force them to comply with more and more obligations for when it comes to risk identification and incident detection systems incident remediation systems in order to strengthen the resilience of companies, including and more specifically European companies. And there are two other items, and I'll stop there because we could talk about them for hours and hours on end. But there's another concern, which is data, and especially data security as part of the company value chains within their partners, so subcontractors and other companies in foreign countries. How do you make sure that you ensure interoperability and confidentiality of data? Of course, you can enshrine this in contracts, and this is what we recommend, but oftentimes contracts are not enough. You need to go above and beyond that and check as well upstream, but also during your contract period. Finally, one of the concerns that our clients have is the cost. We could recommend solutions. It's always about how much is it going to cost compared to the risk that this represents. And this constant tension with solutions that are sometimes quite costly for a company. And companies have to make choices and will not always choose the most secured solutions. Thank you. Olivier, do you see that people are more and more realizing what's at stake when it comes to data? Absolutely, yes. We've been seeing over the past few weeks, especially given the geopolitical situation that you're aware of, that people are realizing things. That people are realizing what's at stake. We used to discuss with different clients, and companies are more and more aware of their technological dependency. With China and Europe and the US. So companies are more and more aware of what's at stake, but citizens as well. We organized a contest not long ago, and we had a lot of young people who used to not really care about these topics, but they were all there. They were all happy to hear about sovereignty, and we could tell that this was something that was of interest to them. They were clearly interested in a digital anything, because they know that this has an impact on their daily life. And we see that there are a lot of companies that are now mapping out their risks and data-related risks. What are the sensitive data that they have, where they are, because not everything is trusted, not everything is sovereign. There are data that can go abroad, and that's not a problem. But for sensitive data, they need to be fully aware of where they are. And this is something that people are more and more aware of. And the public service, this is something that the public service is aware of. And even at state level. And finally, with the state, was starting to have this discussion about where are our data. And talking about sectors that you're all familiar with, and that digital identity, health, education. So we're talking about core topics where we have highly sensitive data that are our data. And this is something that people are more and more aware of. And I know that there are now companies that are able to offer alternative and competitive solutions. So yes, to answer your question, yes, people are growing more and more aware. Now we need to move away from taking stock to action. Now it's time to act. When companies take stock of the situation, and when they look at their contracts and the contracts that they've signed, they realize that they are bound to some things, because there are companies that have contracts and there's not much they can do. So now they need to make sure that in the future we sign contracts that allow us to have enough autonomy and flexibility or reversibility that's not necessarily the case now. Thank you very much. Before we give the floor to Sylvain Blanche, about the contracts, you touched upon it earlier. I assume that there are companies in the room that have signed contracts that may be a little bit blocking them, or that reduces the possibility of migrating their data. Are these contracts being revised? Do you have discussions on them? Well, about these specific contracts, because again, the contract side of things that I was talking about is more about all of the relationship with third parties, including third parties that are going to be managing company data. But above all, and I think I know where you're getting at, but for these contracts, it's really difficult to get out of these, because especially for companies that are supposed to be familiar and understand what they're doing when they're signing a contract. If you've signed and if you've been able to negotiate the contract ahead of time, which is not always the case, but if you sign a binding contract, it's difficult to come out of the contract. So either you could negotiate again, but you need to be realistic, and that's not often the case, or to exit the contract. But again, there are usually dispositions that make it costly, financially speaking, for the company to get out of a contract. So to withdraw from a contract. So it's really difficult. Same question as Olivier. Concretely, is there a before Trump in terms of data localization, even though we know, and I believe that that's the case of a lot of people in the room, we were already thinking about dependency before Trump arrived in power, including during COVID, the Ukraine conflict. But is there a before and after Trump? And all the directives that he's probably going to initiate. Wine and spirits are going to cost 200 or 2,000 euros in the future, right? So is there a before and after, Sylvain? Well, before I answer your question, I'd like to add to what Olivier and Blanche have said about contracts. We oftentimes realize that with our clients, one of the main, most complicated contract issue is tariff increases. When you sign a contract with a company, including American companies that are leaders on the market, you don't have control over your IT management. So, and therefore the R&D aspect that you need for exploring, and this is very impactful for companies, for French companies especially. So this is one of the issues that we have on that. What we need to look at is the chronology. A few years back, where it said that the American government was going to prevent companies bidding for public tenders to have a CSR policy or to have a D&I policy. I'm not sure a lot of people would have said, oh, well, sure, that's going to happen. I know it's going to happen. But I think that the changes that we're seeing today in the geopolitical field should be understood in the chronology. There's no company that can decide that their data is located in the GAFAM to transfer them in a blink of an eye. This has to be done step by step, including document classification. Once you've identified, and we see it more and more in companies, but once you start identifying, classifying the data that you have, you're already working on your autonomy and on your capacity to have data reversibility. On this, we believe that 10 to 15%, depending on the sector and the size of the company, we believe that 10 to 15% of data are sensitive or critical data. GDPR or different standardized data. So you need to be proactive on this sensitive data. The number one objective is to be independent on what allows you to be a competitive company, a specific company, and a specialized company. That's what data is about. UDrive works mainly on sensitive data with companies. What Trump has changed is the acceleration of this reflection. The after Trump, it's been 55 or 50 days that he's been in office. We've seen a considerable acceleration on the decrees that he signs, and we know that he has a 4-year term. It's not going to end anytime soon. So this is going to continue, and for companies to get out of specific American solutions, it's going to take a few years. It takes a few years, but this reflection is accelerated. Massimo, as I said in the introduction, you're CTO of the airport in Geneva, in Switzerland, therefore. And in terms of GDPR, Switzerland has a definition that is very close to what can be found in France. So how? I know you're not the representative for Switzerland, but you're here, so I'll take this opportunity. But what is the Swiss definition? Especially for companies, for countries that offer sufficient data protection, how has this country changed its position when it comes to locating their data and storing their data in countries that were used to be considered an ally country? What does it mean, a country that offers sufficient protection? In Switzerland, public and private companies have the obligation to transfer information, personal information, only to countries that offer a sufficient level of protection based on different criteria enshrined in this code. And up until now, there are about 50 countries. Please use the mic. Thank you. There are less than 50 countries that offer this sufficient level of protection. Last year, in 2024, there was the third revision of the Swiss and US data privacy framework that has led to the US being introduced in that list. In the past, it wasn't possible unless you had a waiver or specific conditions to store data or to send personal data to the US. But the question that this is raising now is that this is still valid. But what is going to happen? Obviously, we've defined also and adapted our strategy to this news, to this information. But what's going to happen in the future? A company cannot base its data localization strategy based on the context. They need a midterm or long-term vision. So of course we're asking ourselves a lot of questions. We don't know what the future holds, but every year, every week, there's a new event. There's something new to factor in. So we've become extremely cautious. 6 months ago, you could launch a program that was taking into account this piece of news, but now we are extremely cautious. This is our approach. We're really, really cautious when it comes to what we do. Thomas, how does the e-commerce consider the data localization issue? Well, I'll answer probably differently. Miracle is a company that was created about 10 years ago in France, slightly over 10 years ago, but for which the citizenship is not so much what defines us. It's more the technology and what we offer to our clients that allow us to stand out from our competitors. And we have clients from all over the world. And the digital world is an environment where it's difficult to foresee the future. And on the internet, you're just one click away from the other end of the world. So for e-commerce, what's at stake here is to have data protection. Sometimes it's personal and sometimes economic data, mainly personal data because it's people's address. This is not highly sensitive data, but it's data that you don't necessarily want to be in someone else's hands. What you like to order, what is your address, and the e-commerce world is now really paying attention to data protection. But it's more on the technological side of things. How do you ensure that I, as holder of a certain number of information from my clients, how do I protect this data? Because I need this information for my business, but what do I do to reconcile all of this, to reconcile the need to access this data and the need to protect it? So I'm not saying that we're not really paying attention to data localization, because we're all paying attention to it, but we're more wondering about how and what technology should be used to protect data. And we're also talking a lot about anonymity, the life cycle of data. We have a ticking bomb with the United States elections, and this does trigger reflections, but we shouldn't forget that we could also have this kind of geopolitical change, and it would be a headache in Europe as well, especially because in the UK is not in the EU, Switzerland either, and we don't know what's going to happen for other countries. So I'll go back to what one of my colleagues have said, we need to have this long-term vision to factor in the reality of this geopolitical context, but also to understand what to do with this data, how to protect this data. And regardless of what happens in the geopolitical world, we need to understand how to manage our data legacy. And it feels like we're talking about data, and that's just something that is definite, that is outlined, and that can be transferred. But data is infinite. You create data all the time. You remove data. This is not oil or gold that you can put in a trunk at a given space.
If I understand the localization of data is not really the good way of looking at it. I mean, today we need to have the technology to do our business, to protect our data, and not just controlling its localization. The main challenge from a technology supplier is not going to be localization. That doesn't mean that it's not important for some of our customers, and I'm going to give you names. La Redoute, for instance, it's an issue for them because there's NIS2 and they're wondering about the data of their consumers. Catch, an Australian customer, they have they insist on localization of data. They work with American suppliers without any problem, but I mean, they're going to ask for the data to be stored in Australia. Same trend for Asia. So from a technological standpoint, I mean, we're going to adjust to that. And depending on what the customer wants to position the data where he wants. So the what is the position of the Geneva airport? Excellent question. An airport is an industrial platform. It's a city with problems to do with security of data, protection of personal data, management of operation, and compliance. About the securitization, apart from the confidentiality, traceability, integrity, we have two elements which are major ones in our report to do with airport security and airport safety. For airport safety to do things, to keep things simply, if you have an inspection point, there's a link with the data confidentiality. It's a major element. Anything going around safety. For the security part, to prevent accidents, the integrity of the data is crucial. That's the first aspect. I mentioned earlier on confidentiality and privacy in an airport. I mean, in an airport such as ours, there are lots of visitors and travelers. You can imagine the great number of people going around there. You filmed everywhere. Thousands of cameras of video surveillance. We follow the flow of passengers, not to police them, but to improve the smoothness of operation. So in this case, the management of the private life, of privacy and confidentiality of this information is key. And we're making huge efforts to stick with that, to comply with that, because the risk is really high. The operational elements now in an airport, I've worked in different domains, but I've never seen a domain where we have so many stakeholders and we have information going through between the airport platform, the agents, the fuelers. I mean, lots of people are involved, and we've got to have this information made available whilst protecting this information. Geneva is an international city, and we don't want for somebody to know that this flight is going to be refueled at that time. So we've got to protect this information, and compliance has been mentioned before. We've got a federal law, we've got international standards, European standards, global standard to stick to. We are border airport, so GDPRs, we've got a lot of people. There's a principle of extraterritoriality, and even if Switzerland is a small country, it's a confederation, it's a federal country, so we have federal laws, cantonal laws, and international laws. So that's basically all the things that we have to put in place to manage the data. There are also elements of classifications which are very interesting. That's the only way we can manage. One word on the alternatives. It's true that you gave us the picture now, and today we've got two representatives here. We know the question that we have now is not the localization of data, but to have solutions that will protect this data, offering a solution that guarantees the sovereignty and the security of data. The lack, and I put that between inverted commas, so when I say the lack, I mean there are offers that we have, but I mean very often when we discuss with the DSI, they're talking about the difference of capacity of innovation, upscaling, and it's very often where the problem lies when we're talking about rival solutions which perform better. Indeed, and that's something that we've been talking for quite a few years now, the lack of alternative that we might have in Europe versus other solutions that would perform, protect, innovate, and that won't cost that much. So I would quote a few examples. In the public sector, there was quite a lot of articles in the press when we're talking about sovereignty or having a more sensitive domain. In 2020, there was the health data hub, health data, where we wanted to get this data back to Europe because it was done with Microsoft. So that's the question that the companies and the governments should address, because they can sign contracts for themselves, but they could also encourage the emergence of alternative European solutions. And after that, you've got the competition law, but we can imagine solutions being funded by the French state or several European states to create these alternative solutions. So I think that we've got to put things in perspectives and give to the state and the different states the power they have, but that they haven't used actually to promote the creation of alternatives. Olivier, is that a mistake to try and find equivalents or total equivalent every time to American solutions? I would ask the question differently. It's a big issue actually. Everybody should be aware that if we wanted to change, we've got our own responsibility. The states have their responsibility. I'm going to deal with the data hub element. We've got to show courage, and we've got to take it to the end. Today, there's progress which is being made. No, the Americans are ahead of us in the solutions. 90% of the software are extra-European software, and they are ahead of us, and in a big way. Having said that, I mean, there are alternatives on a lot of subjects which already exist with a good level of quality of service. I'm going to give you examples to reassure you. My neighbor could add on e-signature. I mean, there are French players, dematerialization of pay slips, for instance. I don't want my pay slip to be in the hands of others. There are some French solutions which have been created to securize and to bring sovereignty archiving. I mean, there are solutions with the right level of security. I could give you a long list of services with French or European players offering solutions. Now, the DSI and the public sectors should be courageous and to make the decisions. It's true that it's more comfortable when you're in charge of the IT services to use an American solutions rather than a European or a French one. You've got to be aware of the situation. You've got to show some courage. We have a path to get things to change. And the story of the data hub, I mean, French state made the decision to use it. It's true that at the time there weren't a lot of solutions available. Looking at what's happening now on the market, some companies have got started. We've got NoopSpot creating a sovereign cloud, and we got in an association with the Dassault system, an international company. We collaborate with Bouygues and another shareholder also. So we're creating this sovereign cloud using source code, using a maximum of French technology, the data hub, and people dealing with the health data. If the question is there an operator, a European operator, which can provide a deep range, as deep as the Americans? The answer is no. What are the services you need? That's what you've got to identify. That there are some French and European players that can offer solutions. I mean, they might be pressurized by a contract which is really limiting people. But I mean, I can tell you that tomorrow, if the French state is calling for tenders, in 6 to 9 months, there are some players, both European and French ones, that can provide the right solution. So the state has got to take things to the full. We can see that EUCS regulation is getting back in favor. So we've got to take things to the end, and the state, in the public order that they're sending out, I mean, I had a discussion yesterday with ministers on this, there should be clauses promoting the fact that we can choose European players for sensitive data. I'm not anti-GAFAM, but I mean, it makes sense in some areas to do that and to provide alternatives. We've got to create a virtuous circle where IT specialists will identify the needs and for the decisions to be actually courageously made. And we do have very nice alternatives. Thomas, a word maybe. There's still a lot of questions to be dealt with. A word on governance. Before switching to a solution, we could think again on the way we manage the data. Massimo, you could probably tell us about governance. Governance might be a first step and a true first lever to use, maybe. Before talking about governance, I would like to react. I mean, I agree with what has been said. I think that with this mediatic, political, and economical noise. I mean, some people forget that our job is to manage risks. And when we have data to be protected, no matter what level they're at, I worked for the army, but when you've got health data, you've got to focus on that. And I'm going to be provocative. I mean, whether the data are in the health data in Microsoft and that the health data of all the French citizens are on the dark web, I mean, we failed, clearly. And what I would like, and that is going to be online with this governance issue, people responsible oversight should wonder about which data to be protected, who you are accountable to, and with that they should make the right decisions to protect the data at the right level, knowing which data, how we're going to produce the data, where it's going to be transferred, and also the third parties which will have access, who will have access to this data. I mean, for health data, for instance, we don't want any third party to have it, but maybe doctors and insurance companies, yes. So we've got to have a clear vision of reality. And talking about a public tender, we should mix support to the industry and economic development, the key points to be dealt with by the states, and promote the national players. But the responsibility shouldn't lie on the companies to make the development of our company. You were talking about Dassault Systèmes. Dassault Systèmes sell to Boeing, to the States, because they've got the best technology and they managed to develop it. And today, there's no problem in the States to work with Dassault Systèmes. And I think that what we have to do, there are some digital players who will have exactly the same welcome. There's not going to be any query about that. So if we can move on that topic, the relevant, innovative players with the right technology are going to be taken on board. I mean, that's how it's going to work. I think that we should move away from protectionism, because the regulation we put in place have an impact on the players we want to protect, more so than on the GAFAM. So let's be careful when we want to try and edict rules which have too much of an impact on the order. We've got to provide our customers with the right technological solution. A word on governance, maybe? I just would like to add on to what was said, and I want to point out this lack of courage that was mentioned earlier on from the CEOs. I mean, they've got a lot of pressure, the IT specialist. I mean, there's the progression of the cyber risk, what the people responsibility have to manage, localization of data, cyber attacks. I mean, the risks are quite high. I mean, it's not a question of being afraid, but today we find ourselves, and I think that maybe what was mentioned at the very beginning of this debate, Mr. Trump, is probably an opportunity to make sure that solutions are addicted now, so or provided now. When you've got a small solution, and opposite that you've got a partner with a value, which is the level of the internal product of France. I mean, there are differences, and there should be a support, a political support. It's not going to be just a matter of technologies. You've got to have a strong political determination. Data governance, yes, I mean, that's become a very important point. In our company, in our report, we've defined a data classification procedure, because not all the data need to be protected in the same way. We've got some public data, some internal data, some confidential data, and some are secret as far as the operational side is concerned. So we've got different level of protection. Data governance is making sure that each data owner is aware of who the owner is. So today we manage that. We have put in place a cloud analyst, because I think that we all agree here that some solutions can only be hosted in the cloud, and we have a committee also with our security representative, the architecture committee, and the legal specialist for our company to identify the risks and see whether the level of those risks is acceptable based on our data classification having to be stored in this cloud, whilst staying pragmatic, because other than that, I mean, we could just get lost and not succeed in any way. We're talking about the need to adapt to the companies, but we haven't talked much about the suppliers for Olivier. I mean, how do you guarantee to your customers that tomorrow that they might decide to unplug a part of their cloud or their business flow, moving away from the American solutions, turning to a French solution? How do you guarantee to the people here in this room that, and to add on to what Blanche said, the cost, I mean, how will you reassure these people that they won't have to invest much more to adapt whilst they're changing solution for a French one and a European one? Sylvain, yes, I wanted to add on to what Thomas said. You don't want to answer my question. No, just briefly. WS, we had $800 million from the American Army to face Microsoft, and now we have American players who've been helped by the American order, and they benefited all the data from American intelligence. Under Biden, he said that he would help all the American companies to win contracts of more than $200 million with the data he had available. So it's an economic war against French and European companies. What I was saying earlier on is that, and we quote the Americans, but it's the same on the Asian side. I mean, when we explain that a French or European company needs to develop and needs to invest in other technologies, before doing that, I mean, there's R&D to be done and a great amount of money to be able to solve that. When you have an increase of plus 23% per year on your plan A, that stops you from becoming independent. The other element which is important is that when we discuss with the companies, in the big majority of cases, Plan A for the major services are American. If we look at Plan B, usually it is also American. The difference that we see more and more today is that Plan B, the sovereign Plan B, becomes a necessity. And I'm going to get to your question. UDrive made the choice in its development to work in close collaboration with ANSI to develop the procedure second class that we've had since 2019. That's the highest level of qualification that gives a guarantee and safety on some data, the ones that are hosted in this environment. And why are we chosen now to equip the boards of large groups? Because the sensitive and strategic data impacting a decision of orientation of the company, it happens in those meetings, and they're not hosted by Americans. They use French or European platforms to be able to make the right decision around the sensitive documents and data. What the IT specialists tell us when we talk about ODrive, they know that we can manage sensitive data, but it is getting more and more complicated to manage the elements composing sensible data. Data goes everywhere, it's shared. We want to create more value around this data, but when we constitute sensitive data, the creation is quite limited. But when we're going to start working around sensitive data, we're going to work on chat, email, video. We're going to share elements. We're going to share screens, and we've got sensitive data that could come under the GDPR law, for instance. So UDrive extracts this sensitive data, 10 or 15%, and put this data in a trusted bubble. That means that you're going to have chat, video, mail, and sharing documents as we have in just one single location. It's a sovereign environment, and when we're going to migrate, when we're going to transfer this data, we won't need to have very fine knowledge of the data. If we can put it inside this sovereign bubble, we have some guarantees, and that's the answer to your question. Olivier, word on securitization of the investments of the company. I'm not going to answer directly your question, it's a joke. There's one thing which is quite simple, which is transparency and trust. So for me, it's a matter of having a true, full transparency on the way all this is operated with the company we want to work with. We've got to do a lot of work with the contracts and purchasing, so we want to carry on this trusted relationship in the long term. So we've got to pay attention to the clauses to securize both sides, and we've got to be careful in what we're saying, because I can't tell you what is going to be on the table 5 or 10 years from now. So we've got to think about reversibility right from the beginning, rather than wanting to lock up this or that customer, because you've got a trusted relationship with a customer, but that's something that you build with time. And it's win-win. Then we've got a lot of work to do with the buyers, and an example that I've got in mind, which indicates the awareness, and which should echo in a lot of you. There's a company that you don't know at Location, but if I tell you about Pronote, how many people have got children in the public sector? Now, Pronote is a company developing, thanks to a math teacher from Marseille, and it has 90% of the population of schools in France. It's a platform which is much used. This math teacher is retiring and sells his company. The education minister said, "Oh damn! I mean, all the data of the education ministry are in his data center in Marseille." So they called on us, and we were fortunate to have a gentleman who had the national interest at mind. So he sold us his company. Other than that, I mean, all the data could have leaked in the States, etc. So the data is in the cloud, it's safe, rest assured. So you've got to anticipate, that's what I'm trying to say, to try and imagine what's going to happen. I just wanted to give you this example to illustrate that the more you anticipate, the better we're going to be. So the ministries are not totally disconnected, I want to reassure you, but it's the top management which need to be courageous. I would like, there's still about half an hour to, I would like to leave this roundtable without feeling desperate. I mean, there are solutions, there are different approaches. Now, I'd like to start with you. In this room, we have people who work connected to lots of different solutions, having thought about the question of sovereignty. But for those who haven't done so and who are faced with a situation today which is getting more complicated, to whom we are asking to work on alternative solutions. As far as the law is concerned, I mean, what can they start reviewing? Are there things to be examined rather than working on existing contracts? I mean, what can they start doing and what can they implement in terms of safety lines in the future contracts?
This is a complicated question. You have contracts first, of course, but not just contracts. And to go back to your question about data governance, the idea, and this is something that's interesting as well, because we see it more and more in companies. We see the role of chief data officer or chief information officer, which is a role that didn't exist a few years back. And I see this as a legal firm. We can work on compliance, litigations as well, but also when you have internal investigations. And I don't know if this is something that you do, but it's very interesting. And to go back to what Thomas was saying, which I think is really important, when you arrive in the information system of a company for internal investigations, usually they're initiated or triggered by alerts that are received. You want to know what's happening or what happened at a specific time in a specific country to make sure that there was no corruption, fraud, or similar activities. And you arrive in a system that is sometimes very heterogeneous, that was not designed as a global ecosystem. And when you don't have a global vision of the whole architecture, it becomes really complicated. Especially for companies, there's something that's really important, which is, what do you keep in terms of data? And for how long do you keep the data? Because you can't just keep data forever. And what was easier in the past, because I've seen sometimes 40 years ago where you had paperwork, paper documents, classified, sorted in a cabinet. But now there's been a data inflation, and it's exponential. Even in internal investigation, when we were working on them 5 or 6 years ago, we didn't have the same volume of data that we now have, because you have chats, emails, people write more and more. You have voicemails as well. Don't think that we can retrieve voicemails We can find voicemails. We can retrieve it. This becomes data. You have transcription softwares as well. You can use and exploit data and images now. There's this inflation of data creation, which raises questions for the company in terms of its responsibility and how do you store the data, how to store it, what type of data do you have, what's important, what's not, especially in case of litigation. And of course, as legal experts, this is something that we have in mind and that you probably don't have in mind, and it makes sense, but it's really important for you to ask yourself these questions. So to answer your question more directly, I think that what's important is to structure governance with people. Whether these people already exist in the company, could be chief information officer who become chief data officer or chief information officer, but it could be someone else as well. But you first and foremost must have this human element that will be able to map out and have an overview of your data situation and having in mind all the different challenges and stakes. And identification of data, classification of data, and data protection, of course, which is fundamental confidentiality, integrity, protection against cyber attacks, because, of course, we're not going to talk about it today, but this is clearly something that a lot of companies are confronted with more and more, and that can have a major impact on their activities and actually have an impact on their survival in the long run. And finally, I know this is something that is really recurrent right now that we didn't talk about much. It's sustainable data management, sustainable digital activities. Is data sustainable? Of course, we have the hardware part of things with recycling, etc. But what about the softwares? And to what extent, if we want to reach sobriety in the future, because we're increasing data, we're using AI a lot that is highly energy consuming. And you have blockchains as well, which also consume a lot of energy. How can we reconcile all of these obligations? But we're reaching the end of the discussion, so very quickly, Sylvain, Olivier, could you tell us about measures that could be taken and implemented by companies that want to get control back over their data? Very quickly, and you were saying that we didn't give a lot of good news today, so I'll try to give you good news through an example. We're currently capable in our company to regain control over our data. As you said, there is a lot of regulation nowadays, a lot more regulations than in the past, and it feels like it's going to hinder companies. But with DGA, within the industrial defense base, there are 3,200 companies behind it. We've made it a second cloud platform available to be used with their DGA. So we can also use it, and all sectors, all activities can also use it. So through one standard, which is extremely binding, DGA, but that also allows us to manage our flows upstream and downstream on these activities. So to be compliant with NIS 2 and others. I hope I was really concise and very quick. That was very quick. I'll be very quick as well. I think everything was said already. But what Blanche was saying, this is the right approach. I don't have much to add to that. Well, great. Thank you very much. Are there any questions so far? Yes. 1 second. Hello. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you. This was really interesting. I have one question. We don't often talk about it, but we're talking about data and the fact that companies can have access to them from elsewhere, from outside of the company. With Copilot in the Office suite, there was a change. I think someone from your company has told me that the users' conditions have changed, and the arrival of Copilot authorizes Microsoft to have access to data on Word, Excel, Outlook, Teams, so pretty much every document in the company. I think, Blanche, this is a question for you, right? Well, I don't know exactly if Copilot has changed this. or whether, and I wouldn't be able to answer you on the technical side of things. However, what is certain is that if you're in a system, there are always going to be risks when it comes to access to this data. So I don't want to answer something wrong. I can't give you a legal input, but we have to talk about AI. If I didn't talk about AI at least once a day, I'm fired. So we all have an appetite, and this is nothing new under the sun. We've talked a lot about protecting data, but we want to do something with this data. New technologies, LLMs, co-pilots, ChatGPT, and you name it. And other Chinese companies, we want these to help us do something useful with our data. So users are eager to exploit this technology. I'm talking about companies, etc. So of course, it's our role to guide people within our companies so that it happens all the while being clever, being smart. If it's just to give the menu at the canteen every day, that's fine. But if you're giving your pay slip, do you really want OpenAI to have access to that? Well, it's up to a company and people to respond to that. And you're right. I agree. We need chief data officers who take control of this question and say, what are we going to do with this data?
Il y a pas mal de choses qui arrivent aujourd'hui.
But let's talk about good news. There are companies such as Dust, a French company. There are a lot of players nowadays that are already starting to be on this market. And I think we should take a step back. Regardless of where the data is, if we think about how to protect it and who has access to it, and I'm not saying that they're intel agencies that won't have access to your data wherever they are. But anyway, there are technological solutions to encrypt the data, to put it where it should be, to erase it whenever needed. And chief information officers, chief data officers must understand, and companies must understand and realize that they have things to do, that they must act, because the worst things that you could do is say, well, wow, I'm overwhelmed and not surf the wave of innovation and to just rely on your laws. Because at the end of the day, people are going to look in the rearview mirror and think, well, how come we didn't anticipate that? So just look at what's around you and think about the risks. There are solutions for everything. There are a lot of projects out there. Around the table, in the trade show, everywhere, there are great solutions to protect your data in a suitable manner. Any other questions?
Est-ce qu'au final, on ne devrait pas avoir une solution pour pouvoir...
Should we not find a solution, just like what we do with our archive, our diploma, to have a suitcase where a go bag that we can use whenever something becomes difficult or complicated or dangerous, just like in the US. Just like we would migrate when there's a danger, because the danger is not so much cyber attack now, but it's more that a tourist that would go in a state where abortion is a crime, legally the state could say, I want to have access to data. So you need to be able to go away and go to a sheltered place, to safe place. To answer your question, I think Olivier has mentioned it 2 times. We talked about data reversibility. If you want to be able to isolate your data as a European citizen, as a company, but also as an individual, if you want to be able to isolate your data, to make it evolve, as we were saying earlier, because that's what the market wants, you need to have reversibility designed initially in the system that you set up or that you decide to set up. When you discuss with different chief information officers of large French companies or technological companies, the data reversibility about sensitive data is the #1 question that you ask in an interview. There's no reflection on sensitive data that does not include that. I was talking about board meetings, but also an R&D. There's a lot of R&D right now that is based on American solutions and else, for which reversibility is extremely complex. So it's mainly this question of reversibility that you need to include in your discussions right from the beginning, as soon as you start data classification. The notion of suitcase, of go bag that you were talking about, it should be used as a safe. It could be, you could have an individual safe where all your sensitive data would be stored and archived. And I don't want to advocate for DigiPost, but there are solutions such as this one. And tomorrow, in the future, there will be the wallet of the future that we're talking about at European level, which is an important topic. And I don't have enough time to talk about it, but the wallets that are going to emerge are also an opportunity to store and archive this sensitive data. And now we'll have to think about how we can transfer them from one country to the other. This is only the genesis of this reflection, but it needs to be interoperable as well. Yes, and you must own the data. And if tomorrow you decide, because as Thomas has said, and that's not what I hope for, but one day in France we could have a crazy person at the head of the country, at the helm of the country, but it's up to each citizen also to know what is sensitive and what is important to them, to manage their own data. We see it on social networks, for instance. We see that people are growing more and more aware of the fact that the information that we put out there will follow you forever. Blanche will probably know more about that, but this is something that's also important to us. What happens when you die? What do we do? What do you do with the data that you've left everywhere? How do you manage the post-life of your digital life? This is something important. Is it supposed to be kept? Is it supposed to be removed? You offer it to people who you want to have access, you want to have access. There will be billions of people that are deceased that will still have a presence online. And this is something that we need to think about, and I think that this is an interesting topic for the future. Again, I really wanted to finish on a hopeful note. But because we're all going to die one day.